I stood on the porch of the house I thought was mine. The night air was heavy, the kind of stillness that makes every small sound sharpen like the crunch of gravel under my shoes, the faint hum of a street lamp buzzing overhead, the hollow echo of my own breath. For 2 years, this door had opened at the turn of a brass key I carried everywhere, tucked into the lining of my bag like a talisman. But tonight, when I slid the key into the lock and twisted, it stopped short. Metal against metal, a refusal. The door that had once yielded to me now held its breath sealed shut. I tried again, pressing harder, twisting with the force of disbelief. The key was the same, but the lock had turned against me. My stomach tightened. Then I noticed the porch light. It had always been a soft yellow glow, warm, familiar, like a handshake. Tonight it was blue. A new bulb, a new choice. A signal that I hadn't been consulted, that changes had been made while I was gone. The house was no longer mine to recognize. From the other side of the door, I heard it. Laughter. Not my laughter. Not the kind that comes from comfort or memory. This was sharper curated, layered with music spilling faintly from a speaker. A gathering. My house, the one I scraped and starved to restore, sanding floors until my hands blistered, repainting walls, until the smell of primer seeped into my hair, was hosting voices that didn't belong to me. They were too loud, too practiced, too pleased with themselves. And the more I listened, the more I realized the truth. They weren't laughing with me, they were laughing instead of me. I stepped back onto the porch, my hand still resting on the doorknob that wouldn't turn. I looked at the windows. Curtains had been replaced with gauzy white fabric I hadn't chosen, pulled just enough to blur the scene, but not enough to hide the silhouettes moving inside. A wine glass tilted, catching the light. A hand gestured broadly. And there, my brother's smooth, lawyerly cadence rising above the hum. Rowan. He was telling one of his stories, the kind where he rewrites our family history into something digestible for strangers. My mother's voice followed Helena's tone, clipped and measured, a gavel wrapped in velvet. And then the chiming laugh of Maribel, my sister-in-law, pitched just high enough to carry through glass. They were inside. My family. My house. My lock turned. The betrayal didn't roar. It whispered. It whispered through the metal resistance of the key, through the altered porch light, through the perfectly timed laughter. It was the whisper of exclusion, the quietest kind of violence, the kind that rewrites ownership, not with theft, but with erasure. I wasn't locked out because I'd lost something. I was locked out because someone else had decided I no longer belonged. My hand shook as I pulled the key free. The cold brass looked foreign in my palm, like an artifact from a life that had already been archived. I should have knocked. I should have shouted. I should have demanded answers, called names, rattled glass until the walls trembled. But instead, I stood still, my breath visible in the blue porch light, and I thought of every hour I had poured into this place. The afternoons I spent stripping wallpaper with Jonas, my neighbor who had told me more than once to be careful, who said that houses keep secrets and so do families. The nights I slept on the floor with only a blanket just to prove I could survive here before it was livable. The way I whispered promises into the dust and wood. You are mine. You will be safe with me. And now I couldn't even open the door. The laughter inside swelled a chorus, pushing against the walls. It didn't falter, didn't pause to wonder why the rightful owner stood outside in the cold. And that's when the truth landed in me like a stone dropped into water, rippling outward. This wasn't an accident. You don't change locks by mistake. You don't alter the color of a porch light without intention. You don't host a gathering in a house that doesn't belong to you without first deciding that it does. Someone had rewritten the script, and I was no longer cast in it. I took a step back, staring at the facade of the Solstice house, the house I had bought, restored, and loved, and realized it had become a stage. And tonight the performance was happening without me. The lock had turned, but so had the story. And the part of me that had once wanted to believe in tradition, in family and belonging, that part was gone. What remained was something harder, sharper, steadier. Because when a lock turns against you, it's not just a door that closes. It's the beginning of evidence. The first exhibit in a case you never thought you'd have to build. I remember the night I decided to set the table, the one I told myself would finally prove I belonged. It was the first dinner I would host in my house, the Solstice house, And I wanted it to be more than a meal. I wanted it to be an offering, a bridge, maybe even a truce. For weeks, I had scraped paint from baseboards and scrubbed soot from fireplaces until my hands were raw. I had carried lumber through hallways, coaxed stubborn windows to open, and whispered to the walls like they were old friends learning to trust me again. This dinner was supposed to be the moment my family saw not just the house, but me. I laid out the dishes slowly with a kind of reverence. They weren't new, weren't polished porcelain, but the mismatched set of antique china I'd spent years collecting piece by piece from flea markets and estate sales. Each plate had a story one rescued from the back shelf of a thrift store, another bargained for in the sticky heat of a summer auction. Their edges were chipped in places, hairline cracks spidering faintly under the glaze, but to me they were more honest than anything my family had ever staged. They carried history proof of survival. For the first time in years, I used place cards. I cut them by hand, pressed the nib of my fountain pen to the heavy paper, and wrote each name carefully. Helena, Rowan, Maribel. I hesitated when I wrote my mother's name. Her H had to be perfect, or she would notice and the whole card would feel ruined. For Rowan, I made the letters taller, confident as if the paper itself had inherited his lawyer's poise. For Maribel, I added a little flourish because she'd noticed style more than sincerity. And then mine. Iris. Just Iris. My name looked smaller, like it had learned to fold itself to make room for everyone else. I positioned the cards above each plate, aligned them with the forks, and stepped back to study the scene. For a moment, it looked right. The room glowed under the soft light of the chandelier I'd salvaged from an attic sale, each crystal drop catching the flicker of candle flames. I had polished the wooden table until it gleamed its surface, reflecting the weight of everything I wanted to say but never could. I filled glasses with water, not wine, because I didn't want the night to blur into excuses or half-truths. I sliced bread thick and uneven, let the crumbs scatter across the cloth, because I wanted the table to look lived in, not staged. It wasn't just food I was offering. It was proof. Proof that I could create something whole out of fragments. Proof that I could carry tradition on my own terms without needing to borrow the gloss of anyone else's approval. And maybe it would be enough to make them stop questioning why I had bought the house in the first place. Why I had chosen to restore it instead of leaving it in dust. I imagined their reactions as I worked, my mother's sharp eyes softening as she ran her hand along the edge of a plate, Rowan lowering his voice, no longer so sure of his cross-examinations, Maribel snapping a picture for her feed, but for once tagging me in it. I imagined them saying my name without hesitation, saying it with pride. Saying it in a way that meant I wasn't just the daughter who strayed the sister who disobeyed the woman who bought a house too heavy for her shoulders. When the table was done, I sat in one of the chairs just to see what it would feel like when the room was full. I placed my palms on the wood, inhaled the faint mix of beeswax polish and roasted vegetables drifting from the kitchen. My chest tightened. I wanted this dinner to be remembered not as a performance, but as a first step. For years, every gathering had been on their terms in glossy restaurants, in stage dining rooms, where crystal goblets gleamed like trophies. This time, it was on mine. In my house. At my table. With my name at the head. And yet, even in that moment of quiet triumph, something unsettled me. The air felt charged, too expectant, as if the walls themselves were waiting to see whether my effort would be enough. I pressed the place card with my name flat against the table, smoothing the paper like it was a contract that needed sealing. The ink shimmered faintly in the candlelight, fragile but unerasable. I told myself this was the night they would see me. Not as an outsider, not as someone stubbornly clinging to dreams, but as a veil who could stand at the center of the family tradition. This table wasn't just a table. It was evidence. Evidence that I had built something real. And for one brief hour before the front door opened, I let myself believe they might finally honor it. The call came the same night I was pushed out. My hands were still trembling from the lock that refused me from the laughter I could hear through my own walls when my phone lit up with an unfamiliar number. For a moment, I thought it was them. My mother Rowan, maybe even Maribel calling to explain, to dress the betrayal in prettier language. But the screen glowed with the name of my bank. I almost didn't answer. My chest was tight. My thoughts scattered and the idea of talking to anyone felt impossible. But instinct pushed my thumb across the screen and I pressed the phone to my ear, my voice catching on a dry hello. Ms. Vale. The voice was brisk professional, but softer than I expected. We're calling to confirm an unusual activity request tied to your account regarding the Solstice property. We just want to verify, are you authorizing any changes to ownership? My heart stuttered. Ownership. The word hit harder than the lock, harder than the laughter. No, I whispered then. Steadier, louder, no. I haven't authorized anything. Why? There was a pause on the other end, the sound of papers, shuffling, keys tapping. That's what I thought the representative said carefully. I just need to assure you our records are clear. You are the sole registered owner of the Solstice House. No liens, no co-signers, no secondary parties. Just you. I closed my eyes, the darkness behind my lids spinning. Just me. My fingers tightened around the phone as though those words were something tangible I could hold on to. My family was inside my house, sipping wine and clinking glasses, performing tradition as though I had been erased. Yet, here was a stranger, her voice steady through the static, telling me the truth, written in contracts and ink. Evidence. The blue porch light. The changed lock. The laughter staged without me. They had all been signals meant to convince me I was already on the outside powerless. But this call was different. It was the kind of proof no laughter could drown out, no curtain could blur. Paper trails do not bow to family politics. I needed to confirm it with you directly. The woman added her tone, slipping into something almost kind. Sometimes people try to make claims. But this house, it's yours. The system shows your name alone. I wanted to thank her, to let gratitude flood my voice, but instead, tears came. Not loud sobs, but the quiet kind that sting your throat before they fall. I tilted my face upward, watching the porch light blur through my vision. Mine. The word echoed stubborn and bright against everything my family had tried to stage. Thank you, I managed. My voice cracked, but the words stood. Thank you for calling me tonight. When I ended the call, the silence wrapped around me again, but it was different now. It wasn't the silence of being erased, it was the silence before a storm, the moment when the air thickens because truth is about to cut through. I looked at the locked door, at the silhouettes shifting inside. They thought they had won that by changing locks and lights. They could change the story. But stories aren't staged in whispers and substitutions. Stories are built on evidence. And now I had Exhibit A. I slid the phone into my pocket, my hand brushing against the brass key that no longer fit. For a moment, I held them both, the useless key and the voice of the bank rep still ringing in my ears. One symbol of what they had tried to take, the other proof of what they could never touch. Inside, laughter spiked again, glasses clinking as though mocking me. But I no longer felt like the girl standing powerless on her own porch. I felt the ground steadying under me. My family could rehearse their narrative, but the title deed had my name alone. They had tried to lock me out of the performance. What they didn't understand was that I no longer needed their script. I had something stronger, colder, undeniable. Exhibit A, the bank call. And with that evidence in hand, I wasn't erased. I was just beginning. Rowan didn't shout. He never had to. His voice was the kind that wrapped itself in calm, and the kind of reason that left you second-guessing your own pulse. We were in the living room of the house I bought, the air thick with the smell of wood polish and something sharper perfume from Maribel drifting like an invisible veil. The candles I'd lit for warmth burned low, their flames shrinking as though even fire understood it wasn't welcome here. He leaned back in the armchair, smooth as ever, his fingers laced over his knee, and delivered his verdict like a closing argument. This house needs to come back to the family. You can move into your old room, Iris. That's where you belong. The words landed heavy, not just because of what they meant, but because of how easily they were said, like he was offering me a kindness. A downgrade disguised as mercy. The place I had rebuilt from dust and ruin, every board nailed with my own hands, every wall scraped clean of mold and memory reduced to a bargaining chip. My name on the deed meant nothing to him. Nothing to my mother, who sat beside him, her posture sharp as iron under silk. Helena didn't speak at first. She didn't need to. She just tilted her chin the faintest nod, and in that gesture I heard everything agreement authority, the weight of tradition pressing down until I could hardly breathe. The sound of her pearls shifting at her collar was louder than her silence. It was confirmation, a sentence delivered without words. I stared at her, my own mother hoping to find softness somewhere in her face, but there was none. Only the same controlled expression she had worn years ago when I told her I wanted to study abroad. I remembered standing in the kitchen, my acceptance letter folded in my pocket, my hands trembling with excitement. I had imagined her pride, her encouragement, but instead she smoothed her apron and said, "We don't leave family. You'll stay here. You'll study nearby." And Rowan even then had echoed her with that same easy confidence, "She'll thank us one day." That pattern had followed me like a shadow. Every choice I made, every step toward independence, clipped short by the invisible scissors of family tradition. I wasn't allowed to step too far, to claim too much, to outgrow the boundaries they had drawn around me. And now here it was again, only this time the stakes weren't classes or cities. It was the house I had bought with my own savings, my own labor, my own will to prove I could stand alone. "I'm not moving back into that room," I said finally, my voice sharper than I intended. It cracked the air like glass. Rowan's smile flickered, but he recovered quickly, leaning forward just enough to look concerned, paternal, as though I were the reckless one. "This isn't about punishment," he said softly. "It's about preservation. This house isn't meant to be yours. Not in that way. You know what solstice means to us. To her." His eyes darted toward Helena, who finally spoke. "You forget yourself, Iris." Her voice was quiet, almost tender, but it cut deeper than Rowan's logic. "Tradition is bigger than your desires. We carry the past forward, not scatter it with our whims. Desires, whims, as though sanding these floors until my palms blistered was a whim. As though sleepless nights scraping paint and repairing beams were just indulgent distractions. As though my vision for this house was less real than their entitlement to it. Something inside me twisted, the same old ache of being reduced, pressed back into a smaller version of myself. The girl told to stay put, to not embarrass the family by wanting more. My throat closed around the memory, and for a moment I couldn't breathe. The room pulsed with silence. Rowan's eyes never left me, steady and unblinking, as though he was waiting for me to surrender. Helena's pearls glimmered still as a noose of light. Even Maribel, perched delicately on the couch, tilted her phone slightly to capture the scene without looking like she was filming. I thought of the bank call, the voice that had reminded me, calm, factual, that the house was mine legally and undeniably. I thought of the key in my pocket, useless in the lock, but still warm from my hand. I thought of every moment they had told me no, and how each one had carved itself into me like rings inside a tree. This was not just about a house. This was about history repeating itself, about the way control weaves itself into love until you can't tell one from the other. About how a family can choke you with the same hands that once held you. I sat straighter, refusing to fold this time. My voice was quiet, but it didn't shake. "I bought this house. It's mine. You don't get to decide otherwise." For a beat, no one moved. Then Rowan sighed, as though I had disappointed him, as though my defiance was childish. Helena's lips pressed into the kind of smile that wasn't a smile at all. It was a seal, a verdict, a reminder that she believed time was on her side. But this time I wasn't the girl begging for permission. I was the woman holding Exhibit A in my pocket, the weight of truth steadier than their tradition. And even as their silence pressed down on me, suffocating and sharp, I knew this conversation was not the end. It was only the beginning of the evidence I would gather piece by piece until their performance cracked wide open. The message came just after midnight, when the house was dark and the silence pressed too close. My phone buzzed once on the nightstand, a glow cutting through the room like a blade. For a second, I thought it might be Rowan or Helena, another round of persuasion disguised as family concern. But it wasn't their number. It was Jonas Gray. Jonas didn't send messages often. He was the kind of neighbor who spoke more with his eyebrows than his voice, the kind who noticed things without announcing them. So when his name lit up my screen, my stomach tightened before I even opened the text. It was a photo. At first, all I saw were cardboard edges stacked in the narrow beam of a garage light, brown boxes sealed with thick strips of tape piled in careful rows. But as I zoomed in, the details became sharper, unbearable. Each box had a label in dark black marker: dining chairs, lamps, sideboard. All the pieces I had chosen myself, every hour I had spent poring over catalogs, saving paychecks, imagining how each item would transform the Solstice house into something alive again. The handwriting, though, was what stopped me. On the side of each box, scrawled like a brand, were two bold letters: R.V. Rowanvale. My breath caught in my throat, a shallow gasp that made the room tilt. They hadn't just taken the house. They had taken my choices, my hours of labor, my identity stitched into wood and fabric. They had packed it all away and stamped his initials over mine as if erasure could be as simple as a pen stroke. Jonas's message followed the image, saw these delivered to storage on Main Street. Thought you should know. I pressed the phone closer to my chest as though shielding it from the air. My mind filled with the nights I spent measuring corners, running my hands over grain patterns, before deciding on a table, whispering to myself that someday my family would see me as someone capable, someone steady. Every decision had been mine. Every object had been chosen not because it was perfect, but because it felt honest. And now, in one photograph, those decisions no longer belonged to me. They belonged to Rowan, or at least that's what the black letters claimed. I studied the handwriting again, zooming closer until the letters blurred. It was his script. I remembered it from years of notes slipped under my door when we were children. Even then, his R's leaned a certain way. His V's cut sharp like daggers. The sight of it here, scrawled over my furniture, made my skin burn. It wasn't just theft. It was possession. A declaration. The room around me seemed to collapse inward. I couldn't hear the hum of the fridge anymore, couldn't feel the steady rhythm of my breath. All I could see were those boxes, my work, my sweat. My vision stacked neatly cataloged, stamped with someone else's name. The injustice of it coiled inside me, not loud, not screaming, but tight and suffocating like wire wrapping around bone. I thought of the first dinner I had tried to host, the table set with mismatched plates, the place cards written in my careful script. How proud I had been of every detail of making something whole out of fragments. And now the fragments themselves were being renamed. R.V. Rowanvale, as if my existence had always been temporary, a placeholder, until he arrived to claim what was his. I scrolled back to Jonas's message. His words were simple, almost apologetic, but I could sense what he hadn't said. Be careful. They're moving faster than you think. Jonas had warned me before, his quiet voice carrying the weight of someone who had seen too much in too many families. Houses keep secrets, he once told me. Families keep worse. I saved the photo, locked it into a folder on my phone, and labeled it the way I knew I would need to remember it. Exhibit B. Not just evidence, but a mirror. Proof that the lock, the laughter, the conversation about returning the house to the family, none of it was a misunderstanding. This was orchestrated. Calculated. They weren't just trying to push me out. They were rewriting me out piece by piece until nothing bore my name anymore. The thought pressed against my ribs like a scream I couldn't release. My house, my furniture, my labor, my name. All packed into boxes that bore the mark of my brother. The initials weren't just letters, they were an execution. But as I stared at the image, anger began to loosen something inside me. If Rowan thought initials could erase me, he had underestimated how stubborn truth could be. Photos don't lie. Paper trails don't vanish. Evidence has its own kind of permanence, one that even tradition can't override. I saved the photo again this time, backing it up twice as if to armor it against disappearance. My hands shook, but not from fear anymore. From certainty. Exhibit B. The manifest of boxes. Proof that the story they were writing wasn't truth, it was theft dressed as heritage. And for the first time, I realized I wasn't powerless. I was the archivist, the keeper of exhibits, the one building a case they couldn't laugh away. The first night I slept in the car, the world felt smaller than I had ever imagined it could be. I pulled the seat back as far as it would go. but it never went flat and my body folded into awkward angles. The air smelled faintly of gasoline and pine-scented air freshener, a smell that clung to my hair, my jacket, my skin. Every time I shifted, the leather groaned beneath me, a tired echo that seemed to remind me I wasn't home. I wasn't anywhere. In the trunk behind me, the box rattled. Valley, that's what I called it. The storage bin where I had stuffed the few things I could grab before the door shut against me thudded against the side whenever I turned a corner. The sound wasn't loud, but it was steady, insistent like a heartbeat. Each thump landed with a single phrase that refused to leave my mind. They erased you. Erase. Such a clean word for such a violent act. People think erasure is a blur, a slow fading, but it isn't. It's sudden. A lock turned to bulb-swapped initials scrawled over boxes. It's swift and deliberate, and it leaves you standing in the cold, trying to catch the ghost of a place that doesn't recognize you anymore. Every bump in the road made Valley knock harder, repeating the sentence over and over. They erased you. They erased you. They erased you. I drove until the gas gauge sank low, the needle glowing red like an accusation. At a station just past midnight, I pulled in under harsh fluorescent lights. They buzzed above me, merciless and cold, casting shadows that seemed to scrape across the hood. I sat there for a long time before stepping out, my breath visible in the frigid air. It came out fast at first, shallow bursts, then slower, heavier until it fogged the glass behind me. The night was so still that even the sound of the pump clicking into place felt like a disruption. I wrapped my arms around myself, staring at the rows of snack wrappers inside the station shop, the bright displays of magazines with glossy promises of order and perfection. Inside those pages, families smiled for holiday spreads, their houses glowing in curated warmth. I thought of my own house, my solstice house, its windows glowing with laughter that didn't belong to me. My family wasn't glossy, but they were curated all the same. Every move calculated to keep the story intact. And now I was the flaw they had edited out. My reflection in the station window startled me. Pale face shadows under my eyes, hair flattened against my jacket. I looked like someone caught between worlds, too worn out to belong to the life I had fought for, too stubborn to fall into the exile they had planned. I pressed my palm against the glass, tracing the outline of myself. It felt thin, temporary. For a moment, I thought maybe this is what they wanted all along. Not just to take the house, but to convince me I didn't exist outside of it. Valley knocked again when I leaned back into the driver's seat, a dull reminder of everything crammed inside papers, receipts, scraps of proof I couldn't leave behind. Each one felt heavier than furniture, heavier than walls, because they carried the only thing I still had evidence. The thuds were no longer just accusations. They were a pulse, a reminder that I wasn't done. I sat there with the engine off, the silence filling every inch of the car. My breath still fogged in the cold, curling into the air like smoke from a candle. I closed my eyes and remembered the table I had set for them, the plates I had chosen, the name cards I had written by hand. They hadn't just rejected a meal. They had rejected me. And yet here I was with the one thing they couldn't see, the one thing they had underestimated. I was still keeping record. The car became a cell, but also a vault. Every thump from the trunk was another page, turning another exhibit waiting to be placed on the table of truth. If they thought this night would break me, they hadn't calculated the cost of trying to erase someone who had already lived too long in the margins. When I finally turned the key in the ignition, the engine roared louder than it needed to, startling the silence. I let it run, let the heater push out weak blasts of warmth, and I stared into the black stretch of highway ahead. My hands tightened around the steering wheel, not from fear, but from resolve. They had locked me out of my house, but the road was mine. They had tried to stamp their initials over my choices, but the record still carried my name. They had pushed me into a car seat for the night, but they had forgotten something fundamental: I don't disappear quietly. The trunk rattled as I pulled out of the station, Valley thudding once more. The sound no longer whispered, "They erased you." It whispered something else, now low and certain. Not yet. Not done. I didn't expect her. By then, I had grown used to silence filling the spaces where family should have stood. I had grown used to the feeling that every word spoken in my direction was meant to bend me back into place, to clip me neatly into their narrative. So, when Clara Hensley appeared, tall, sharp, unhurried, I didn't know whether to trust the steadiness in her voice or the way her eyes seemed to see right through the fractured edges of me. We met in a cafe just outside the old district, the kind of place that still smelled faintly of burnt espresso and paper from the newspapers stacked by the door. I had been scribbling in my notebook, trying to line up the fragments of evidence I had gathered, photographs, messages, receipts, into something coherent. But the pages only looked like chaos, a storm of ink that refused to resolve into a case. She slid into the chair across from me, setting her leather briefcase on the floor with a soft thud. I recognized her name from a business card Jonas had slipped me days before when he'd said carefully, "You might need someone who isn't bound to their bloodline." At the time, I brushed it off, thinking I could handle this myself. But looking at her now, the sharp tilt of her jaw, the calm focus in her eyes, I realized Jonas had been right. "You're Iris," she said, not asking but confirming. Her tone was level, but there was something in it. Something firm, like the sound of a door locking behind her, except this time it was locking in my favor. "Yes," I whispered. My throat felt too dry, my voice too small. She leaned forward, resting her elbows on the table. "Listen to me carefully. Strangers will be more honest with you than family ever will. Blood ties are the first excuse people use to betray. What you need now isn't loyalty. It's record. Evidence. You need to build a file that breathes louder than their laughter." Her words landed like an anchor. My fingers froze on the edge of my notebook, pressing so hard into the paper that I thought it might tear. No one in my family had ever spoken to me like that, direct, unvarnished, without the false comfort of tradition. "I've already started," I admitted. I pushed the notebook toward her, embarrassed by the messy scrawl, the smudges of ink where my hands had shaken. "I have photos, screenshots, the bank call. Even Jonas sent me a picture of the boxes with Rowan's initials." Clara flipped through the pages slowly, her face unreadable. When she stopped at one photo, the shot of the boxes marked RV. Her eyebrow arched just slightly. "Good. This is a beginning. But you can't just keep these as scraps. You need structure. A dossier. Think of it as a house you build out of paper and ink instead of wood and stone. They can try to tear it down, but if you build it right, it stands." Her words made my chest tighten. A house built of paper. I thought of Solstice House, stripped from me, its windows glowing with people who had decided my name no longer belonged. Maybe this was the replacement I needed, not a substitute, but a mirror. If they had taken the physical walls, I would rebuild in documents, in exhibits, in truths they couldn't repaint. Clara looked up, her gaze steady. "You don't wait for them to hand you recognition. You take it. Every lock they change, every light they swap, every box they mislabel. Each one is evidence. You archive it. You document the silence as carefully as the noise." Do you understand? I nodded, the motion small but certain. For the first time in weeks, I felt the air shift. Not with fear, but with the possibility of order, of reclaiming the chaos they had thrown me into. Clara closed the notebook and slid it back across the table. Her hand lingered on it for a moment, the weight of her palm pressing down as if to stamp it with authority. "Start tonight," she said. "Every detail. Times, dates, words. This isn't about revenge. This is about record. When the story turns, it won't be because they allow it. It will be because the truth is louder than their performance." Her voice carried the kind of certainty that left no room for doubt. And as I sat there, the cafe buzzing faintly around us, I realized that for the first time since the lock turned against me, I didn't feel erased. I felt named. When she stood to leave, her briefcase clasp clicked shut, final and clean. "You think they hold the script?" she said, pausing at the edge of the table. "But what you're holding now, that's the archive. That's where the real power lives." And just like that, she was gone, the door swinging shut behind her, the scent of cold air rushing in before it disappeared. I sat for a long time staring at my notebook. The ink still smudged, the handwriting still shaky, but suddenly it didn't feel like chaos. It felt like scaffolding. A beginning. The family thought they had written me out. What they didn't know was that someone had just handed me the pen. The voicemail came in at 2:17 a.m., long after the world had gone quiet, long after the gas station lights and the cafe conversation with Clara had faded into memory. My phone vibrated once on the dashboard of the car screen, lighting up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring out. I was too tired to answer another unknown voice, but when the beep ended, the message settled into my inbox like a loaded gun. I listened once, then again. Maribel's voice poured into the tiny speaker, her tone as honeyed as ever, but underneath it carried something darker, something rehearsed. "Don't let her take the photo albums back," she whispered. A pause. The sound of muffled chatter in the background, maybe glasses clinking, maybe Helena's low hum of authority. Then Maribel's voice sharpened, the sweetness gone. "Make it look voluntary. Perform it. If she asks, smile and tell her it was her decision all along." I froze, my fingers tightening around the phone. The words looped louder with each replay. Don't let her take the photo albums back. The albums, the ones I had pulled from the attic, dusty leather spines, cracked from years of neglect. I had stacked them carefully in the study, planning to restore them page by page to preserve the history we all pretended to honor. Photographs of birthdays, winters, graduations, even funerals, the messy truth of our family's life. And now Maribel's voice was proof that even memory itself was being staged against me. Not only had they stolen my house, my furniture, my labor, they wanted to reframe the past. To strip away the images, the evidence of who we really were, and replace them with a performance that served their script. If I lost those albums, I would lose the last unfiltered fragments of our story. I pressed the phone to my ear until it hurt, until Maribel's words felt etched into my skull. Make it look voluntary. That was the part that made my blood run cold. This wasn't chaos. This wasn't misunderstanding. This was choreography. They weren't satisfied with removing me. They wanted to make me complicit in my own erasure. They wanted the world to believe I had stepped aside willingly, that I had smiled as the lock turned, nodded as the initials were scrawled across my belongings. I thought of my mother's nod in the living room, her silence that felt like a verdict. I thought of Rowan's calm, rehearsed cadence offering me the mercy of my old room. And now Maribel's voicemail slotted into place like a missing puzzle piece. Together, they formed a picture I could no longer deny. This wasn't family conflict. It was a campaign. The car was cold around me, my breath fogging the windshield, but inside my chest, a fire caught. Clara's words echoed. Strangers will be more honest with you than family ever will. Build a record. Build it now. And here it was handed to me, not in rumor, not in suspicion, but in Maribel's own voice. A confession dressed in casual instruction. I saved the voicemail immediately, backing it up to the cloud, to my hard drive, to every digital corner I could find. This wasn't just another moment to endure. This was Exhibit C. Proof that the performance was scripted. Proof that my erasure wasn't accidental. It was curated, produced and rehearsed. For a long time, I sat in the driver's seat, the glow of the screen painting my hands pale blue. My fingers hovered over the play button again and again, each repetition cutting deeper, each pause stretching longer. I wasn't sure whether to cry or laugh because somewhere inside me, the disbelief was beginning to fade. And once disbelief fades, anger takes its place. I rolled the window down just a crack. The night air rushed in sharp and cold, burning the inside of my lungs. I needed the sting. I needed the clarity. My family wasn't fumbling their way through a disagreement. They were orchestrating a stage play, and I had been cast as the absence, the empty chair at the table, the missing name on the list. But they had forgotten something important. Performances end. Records last. I pressed the phone to my chest, the cold glass hard against my skin. For the first time, I felt steadier than the silence around me. The evidence was growing locks. Lights, initials on boxes, and now a voice that betrayed itself in the dark. One day soon, I would play this message aloud, and it would sound less like betrayal and more like testimony. The car engine hummed when I finally turned the key headlights cutting through the empty road. Behind me, the voicemail waited, saved and secure in Exhibit, ready for the day I would no longer whisper, but speak. And as the tires rolled forward, I told myself again, I wasn't erased. I was recording. It was Jonas again who tipped me off. His message was brief, just a link, no explanation, no commentary. But the moment I opened it, my pulse went sharp. The file loaded slowly, a shaky feed stamped with the faint outline of a date and time. The frame flickered once, then steadied. The view was grainy, but clear enough the hallway of my house. My house. The camera was one of the old security units the previous owner had left behind, half-broken, barely functional. I had meant to replace it, but hadn't gotten that far. I didn't think I needed surveillance inside my own walls. But Jonas had known. He had rewired one of them months ago quietly without asking because he said sometimes houses needed witnesses. The footage rolled on silent, the colors slightly washed out. And there she was, Helena Vale, my mother. Her face was calm, expressionless, as if she were opening her own home. She walked straight to the sideboard drawer, the one where I kept important files. Her hands didn't fumble. They moved like they already knew exactly what they were searching for. She pulled it open, sifted through, and withdrew the folder I had labeled Deed and Financials. My stomach turned. I had sealed that folder myself. The screen flickered again, and suddenly Rowan entered the frame. His suit jacket, still on tie, loosened as though this were some late-night boardroom meeting rather than a break-in. He placed a stack of papers on the dining table, neat, deliberate. His posture was casual, but his movements were rehearsed. I leaned closer to the glow of the screen, heart pounding. The contract. It had to be. Some mock document, some carefully staged counterfeit designed to overwrite what was already mine. He smoothed the top page with his palm, aligning the edges with precision as though tidiness could disguise treachery. And then came Maribel. She wasn't carrying files. She wasn't rifling through drawers. No. She drifted into the room with her phone in one hand and a framed photo in the other. I recognized the picture. An old family portrait I had hung in the hallway. The kind where I had been younger, standing slightly off-center hair. Messy, smile-shy. Maribel glanced at it once, her lip curling, before slipping it out of the frame. From her phone, she pulled up one of her polished Instagram prints, her favorite photo. All gloss and angles, her body turned toward the light like she was born in it. She slid it neatly into the frame, replacing memory with performance. The sight of it made me shake. Helena rewriting documents, Rowan scripting legality, Maribel curating the walls. Each of them carving out my presence in their own way. My mother in silence, my brother in contracts, my sister-in-law in images. It wasn't random. It wasn't unplanned. It was systematic. They weren't just erasing me from the present. They were rewriting the house itself, detail by detail, until nothing remained that carried my name, my choices, my proof of ever being there at all. I replayed the footage over and over, my breath quickening each time. The hum of the old camera, the grainy light, the gestures that looked ordinary to anyone else but burned with betrayal in my eyes. My family wasn't just performing exclusion at the dinner table anymore. They were staging it into the very bones of the house. The worst part was their calm. No one looked hurried. No one glanced nervously at the door. They moved as if what they were doing was already sanctioned, as if the house itself had given them permission. It was the casualness that made my skin crawl, the quiet assurance of people who believed they could never be caught. But they were caught. Right here, pixel by pixel, frame by frame. I saved the file, renamed it with the same system Clara had told me to use, Exhibit C CCTV Sequence. My hands shook as I typed, not from fear this time, but from clarity. This wasn't just a recording. It was testimony, silent but undeniable. I leaned back in the car seat, staring at the dark road ahead, the weight of my phone in my lap. Their laughter, their locks, their staged nods, they had all felt like whispers I was left alone to decipher. But this was different. This was sight. Proof caught by a machine that didn't care for tradition, for family ties, for curated appearances. The camera only cared for truth. For the first time, I let myself imagine the day I would play this footage aloud. I pictured their faces, the cracks forming in their composure, the silence that would no longer serve them. In the frame I had watched Helena open the drawer, Rowan lay down the contract, Maribel replaced the portrait. But in my mind, as I saved the video again and again, I saw something else, their certainty, faltering, their stage lights dimming. Because performances end, and recordings remain. The room was colder than it should have been. Not the kind of cold that comes from a draft or a broken vent, but the kind that seeps into bone, the kind that lingers even when you rub your hands together and exhale clouds of breath. They called it a hearing clinical procedural, but it felt more like a stage. The long table gleamed under fluorescent lights, polished to the point where it reflected fragments of our faces, distorted and incomplete. Papers stacked at one end, glasses of water sweating faintly on coasters. A silence so heavy it seemed to press against my chest. I sat across from Helena Vale, my mother. She didn't flinch at the cold. She never did. She wore it like armor pearls gleaming against her throat, her spine a straight line of authority. Rowan lounged beside her, the picture of calm fingers drumming once on the tabletop, before stilling in deliberate composure. Maribel was further down, phone resting face down, but close enough to her hand to remind us all she could snatch it up in a second, turn the room into curated content. They looked like they were born in this space, like the chill was their natural climate. Me, I felt like an intruder in my own story. But I had brought my file, the dossier Clara had taught me to assemble thick, now with exhibits. Photographs, recordings, contracts, voicemails. The paper weighed heavy in my lap, steadier than my heartbeat. The chair scraped against tile as I leaned forward, the sound sharp, almost jarring. My voice came before I could second-guess it, low but clear. You didn't just take my house. The words echoed in the sterile room, heavier than I expected. You tried to erase me. Helena's expression didn't break, not even a flicker. Her eyes were steady dark, reflecting nothing. But I saw the smallest shift, the tightening at the corner of her mouth, the pearls shifting as she inhaled. Rowan gave a short laugh. Polished, dismissive, the kind you'd expect in a courtroom hallway when a witness says something the jury might find too emotional. Erase you, he said softly, drawing the word out as though testing it. Iris, no one is erasing you. We're protecting the family's legacy. That house is part of it. You can't keep it all for yourself. I wanted to slam my hand on the table to shatter the veneer of civility. Instead, I reached into the folder and pulled out the first photograph boxes stacked in a storage unit, each marked with his initials RV. I slid it across the table, the paper whispering as it moved. Then why were my choices labeled with your name? Rowan's eyes flickered, but only for a second. Helena placed her hand gently on the photo, her touch so light it was almost reverent. Because the house isn't about you, Iris, she said. Her tone was soft, almost pitying. You made the mistake of thinking you could own something that belongs to all of us. You were always a caretaker, never the author. Caretaker. The word stung worse than anything. As if my sweat, my labor, my nights of sanding floors until my hands bled had been charity for their benefit, not a claim to my own life. As if I had been holding the house in trust for them, waiting until they deemed it time to take it back. I laid down another exhibit, the voicemail, Maribel's voice sharp and unmistakable. Don't let her take the photo albums back. Make it look voluntary. The words spilled into the air, replayed on my phone speaker, her tone filling the sterile room. For the first time, Maribel shifted in her seat, her hand twitching toward her phone before she stopped herself. That's not context. She started, her laugh brittle, too high. You're twisting. No, I cut in. My voice was louder now, shaking, but not from fear. From release. That's what erasure sounds like. Not a mistake. Not tradition. A performance. One you scripted to make me disappear. The silence after my words was louder than any denial. I could feel the chill deepening the walls themselves, listening. Clara had warned me this would happen, that they would never admit it, that their silence would be their truest testimony. I leaned back, gathering the papers, the photos, the recordings. My voice steadied each word, a nail hammered into place. You changed the locks. You replaced the lights. You stamped my furniture with Rowan's name. You rehearsed my absence until it looked real. But I'm here, and I am not a caretaker. I am the owner. I am the record. And you don't get to erase me. Helena's eyes narrowed, the pearls at her throat glinting under the lights. She didn't speak. Neither did Rowan. Neither did Maribel. The silence spread out, brittle, fragile, threatening to crack. And I knew in that stillness that I had finally forced them to see me not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as an inconvenience to be staged away, but as a witness, a record, a voice they couldn't unwrite. The room remained cold, but for the first time I wasn't the one shivering. It arrived the way most truths do, not as a confrontation, but as a file slipped quietly into my hands when no one was watching. Clara had emailed it with no subject line, no explanation, just a single attachment. The title was bare, almost clinical audio file 11 MP3. My thumb hovered over it for what felt like hours before I pressed play. The voices filled the room, instantly crackling with the faint static of a recording captured without consent. Rowan's voice came first, smooth, patient, the kind of cadence that could lull a jury into agreement even when he was dismantling their rights. "We start with the Wi-Fi," he said. "Cutter access reset everything under my name. It won't look like much, but it builds a foundation. Control the network, control the narrative." Maribel's laugh followed, light and effortless, the same laugh she used on camera, the one that had 100,000 followers, convinced she was nothing but charm. And the bill, she added. "We transfer all the utilities into Helena's address. It looks cleaner if everything points back to her. The more seamless it seems, the easier it is to argue that Iris never really owned it." I pressed my palm against my mouth as though holding the sound inside me could keep it from shattering the air. Their voices rolled on, steady and casual, as if they were discussing a dinner menu instead of orchestrating my erasure. Rowan again. "Then we frame her instability. That's the linchpin. She's always been fragile. We don't say it outright, of course. We let it trickle. She left school, she spends nights in the car, she obsesses over scraps of paper. All we need is a whisper of unfit, and the rest will write itself." The tape hissed briefly, the sound of a glass being set down, maybe ice shifting. Then Maribel's voice, lower this time, almost conspiratorial. "We make it look voluntary. That's the performance. If people think she gave it up willingly, there's nothing to question. We'll curate the posts, a few smiling photos, a caption about Iris moving on. They'll believe what they see on a screen before they'll believe her." My chest ached. Each word was a blade cutting not just at me, but at the foundation of every memory I had built with them. The plan was meticulous, chilling in its simplicity. They weren't just dismantling my claim, they were dismantling me. I stopped the audio halfway through, my hands trembling so badly the phone nearly slipped from my grasp. I wanted to scream, to throw the device across the room, to drown their voices in anything louder than silence. But I pressed play again because I couldn't afford not to hear it all. Rowan's tone shifted, slightly colder now. "This isn't theft. This is restoration. She bought the house, yes, but ownership isn't just a deed. It's continuity. It's legacy. She doesn't understand that." She never did. And Maribel almost sighing with satisfaction. "Then we'll teach her." The recording ended abruptly, the silence afterward louder than the voices themselves. I sat frozen, phone pressed to my chest. My reflection faint in the dark window across from me. My own breathing was ragged, uneven, as though my body couldn't decide whether to collapse or ignite. This wasn't paranoia. This wasn't imagination. This was Exhibit D. I replayed the words in my head, unfit. Fragile, voluntary. The vocabulary of erasure rehearsed until it sounded natural. They weren't just rewriting documents or staging photographs. They were constructing a person who wasn't me, an unstable, incapable shadow designed to justify everything they had taken. And if I didn't fight, that shadow would become my only record. I saved the file in 3 different places, labeling it in bold Exhibit D strategy tape. The title felt like a wall, a fortress. Their plan, so careful, so deliberate, had now betrayed itself in its own words. The arrogance of it stunned me, that they thought they could speak freely, that no one would ever hear, that truth wouldn't find its way to the surface. For a long time, I sat with the silence. Then Clara's words came back to me. "Strangers will be more honest with you than family ever will." And I realized that in a way, Rowan and Maribel had been strangers to me all along. Strangers wearing the faces of family strangers whose loyalty was to a story, not to me. The house they had tried to take the locks, they had turned the albums, they had hidden the contracts they had forged. Those were battles. But this tape, this was war. And I wasn't just holding evidence anymore. I was holding their confession. The words didn't come as a shout or even a gavel strike. They arrived quietly, carried on the steady voice of the judge, yet they cut through the room sharper than any blade. The sole owner of record, he said, glancing at the stack of documents laid neatly before him, is Ms. Iris Vale. For a second, the world held its breath. I sat there, hands pressed into my lap, feeling the texture of the papers Clara had helped me assemble. Each exhibit I had gathered photographs of mislabeled boxes, the voicemail dripping with calculation, the CCTV footage, the strategy tape lay in a neat file beside me. Evidence. Truth. Proof. And now for the first time, someone outside my family had said it aloud. My name. Not as a daughter, not as a sister, not as a problem to manage, but as the rightful owner. Helena Vale, my mother, didn't argue. She didn't even lift her gaze. She simply lowered her eyes to the polished surface of the table, pearls slipping slightly forward as her chin bowed. The weight of silence was heavier than any speech she could have made. Her hands, always so precise, clasped tightly in her lap, the skin around her knuckles pale. She looked smaller somehow, though I knew she would never admit it. Rowan, my brother, leaned back in his chair. His jaw worked once, a muscle twitching as though he had words ready, but decided to swallow them whole. The lawyerly cadence he carried everywhere had abandoned him. No smooth rebuttal, no sly reinterpretation of legacy or continuity. Just silence. A silence that admitted what his mouth would not. Maribel shifted beside him, fingers twitching near her phone, though for once she didn't dare lift it. No filtered lens could reframe this moment. No Instagram caption could soften the ruling. For the first time, she wasn't performing. She was simply present, and that seemed to unsettle her more than anything else. I should have felt triumphant. I should have wanted to smile, to breathe in the justice of it all. And part of me did my lungs expanding for the first time in weeks, the knot in my stomach loosening just enough to let in light. But another part of me felt hollow. Because the victory didn't erase what had been done. It didn't give back the nights in the car, the laughter echoing from behind a locked door, the boxes stamped with someone else's initials. It didn't erase the voicemail where my erasure was rehearsed like a script. It didn't erase the cold. The judge moved on his words, already turning to formalities, but I barely heard them. My eyes stayed on Helena and Rowan. I thought of the girl I had been years ago, standing in the kitchen with her acceptance letter told she couldn't study abroad because family came first. I thought of the woman setting the dinner table with mismatched plates, praying for recognition that never came. And now I thought of myself sitting here, file in hand, being told by a court of law what I had known all along the house was mine. My name was enough. The irony struck me with a bittersweetness. It had taken strangers, judges, lawyers, even Jonas, with his quiet watchfulness, to affirm what my own blood refused to acknowledge. Strangers had protected me where family had tried to dismantle me. When the session adjourned, I gathered my folder carefully, each page sliding into place like bricks in a wall I had built myself. I stood spine straight and let the silence linger. Helena didn't look up. Rowan didn't speak. Maribel's phone remained still. And for once, I didn't need their voices. As I walked out of the cold chamber, the doors heavy behind me, I understood something I hadn't before. Vindication isn't the same as healing. A verdict can give you back a house, a name, a title. But it cannot give you back trust. It cannot restore what was broken in the quiet hours and the whispered conspiracies and the rehearsed betrayals. And so the question remained heavier than the folder in my hands, heavier than the judgment stamped with my name. Could I ever forgive them? Or was this the point where bloodline became nothing more than history? Recorded, archived, and finally left behind. The echo of the judge's voice lingered in me. The sole owner of record is Ms. Iris Vale. I repeated it silently over and over until it became not just a verdict, but a vow. They had tried to erase me. Instead, they had written me into permanence. The first night I returned to the Solstice house after the verdict, the air was sharper than I remembered. The key slid into the lock without resistance, smooth and obedient, as if mocking all the times it had turned against me. The door creaked open, spilling a draft of cold air that smelled faintly of lavender oil. I stopped in the entryway, my hand still on the knob, because the scent hit me like a slap. Lavender, Helena's choice, never mine. She had always insisted it calmed the nerves, masked unpleasantness, created an air of tradition. Now it felt suffocating, a perfume of control clinging to the walls as if she had only just stepped out of the room. The house was quiet, but not empty. Silence in a place like this carries weight. It holds the imprint of everything that's happened inside it. My shoes clicked softly against the hardwood floors. I had sanded myself each sound, echoing into corners where their laughter had once spilled. I walked slowly through the hallway, fingertips grazing the wall as if to remind the house who I was. Every step was a reclamation. The first thing I saw was the frame. The photograph of Maribel, her polished smile, her body angled to catch the light. Her caption-ready perfection still hung where my childhood portrait used to be. I stared at it for a long time, the surface glossy under the dim light. Then I lifted it off the nail. My hands didn't shake. I set the frame face down on the floor and leaned it against the wall as though I were laying down a body that no longer belonged here. One by one, I began removing their replacements. Every curated photo, every object chosen to overwrite me. I pulled Rowan's sleek law journal from the mantel where he had placed it like a signature. I opened drawers still lined with Helena's lavender sachets, their faint perfume spilling into the air like a ghost that refused to leave. I found candles burned down to Stubbs, her ritual of ownership, leaving traces of herself in rooms that weren't hers. I carried each thing to the center of the room, creating a small pile evidence of their performance. As I worked, the house shifted. The lavender scent didn't vanish, but underneath it I caught the faint smell of wood and dust, the smell of the Solstice house, as I first found it abandoned but waiting. I inhaled deeply, letting the lavender sting my lungs, reminding myself that ghosts don't linger forever. They fade if you give them time. Upstairs in the study, I found the albums. They were still there, stacked neatly in the corner, though I could tell they had been touched. Pages rearranged, photographs moved. I sat cross-legged on the floor, opening the first cover. The images stared back at me, birthdays with lopsided cakes. Winters where the windows frosted so thick we traced shapes with our fingers, summers where we stood squinting into the sun. Unfiltered memories. Not staged, not curated. Proof of the life we had lived before performance replaced truth. I ran my hands over the pages, promising myself I would restore them page by page as carefully as I had restored the house itself. The deeper I went, the quieter I became. My anger was still there, humming under the surface, but it shifted into something steadier. This wasn't just about removing their traces. It was about breathing life back into what was mine. Claiming the house not only in name, but in spirit. By midnight, the pile in the living room had grown a strange shrine of all the things they'd tried to use to overwrite me. I stood above it, the lavender still heavy in the air, and realized how fragile their performance had always been. All it took was my hands, steady and deliberate, undoing them piece by piece. They had staged an erasure, but erasure only lasts if you let it. I lit a single candle, not lavender, but unscented, its small flame flickering against the walls. The light was softer, more honest. I sat on the floor beside it, my back against the wood I had polished, and let the silence settle. This was my house again. Not because the judge had said so, not because the papers bore my name, but because I was here undoing every mark of theirs, restoring every detail to truth. The Solstice house was colder than it had ever been, but the cold no longer frightened me. It steadied me. It told me the performance was over and the record was mine to keep. Tomorrow, I would strip the lavender sachets from the drawers, scrub the perfume from the walls, repaint the places where their shadows lingered. But tonight, it was enough to sit in the quiet, surrounded by evidence of both their betrayal and my endurance. For the first time in months, I closed my eyes in the Solstice house and felt something that almost resembled peace. Not forgiveness. Not yet. But a beginning. The night I invited them in the Solstice house sounded different. For months, its rooms had carried only echoes of arguments, of staged laughter that wasn't mine, of silence pressed too heavy against the walls. But this time, when the door opened, the air shifted. It wasn't lavender. It wasn't curated. It smelled of coffee takeout cartons, paper napkins folded in halves. Ordinary, unpolished, alive. Jonas was the first to step across the threshold. He paused in the entryway, looking up at the beams I had sanded until my hands ached, then down at the scuffed floorboards. He gave the smallest nod as if confirming to himself that the house recognized me again. He carried a bottle of wine tucked under his arm, no label worth bragging about, and a lopsided smile that made the tension in my chest ease. Clara came next, briefcase still in hand, though she set it aside almost immediately. Her coat swept behind her like a line drawn under the past. She gave me a look steady, measured, but softer than the first day we met in that cafe. "You did it," she said simply. And I understood that she wasn't talking about the verdict or the evidence or even the house. She meant surviving it. Holding on to myself when they had tried so hard to write me out. The others filtered in friends I'd made quietly outside the walls of bloodlines and obligations. A neighbor who once lent me tools when mine broke. A coworker who noticed when I skipped lunches to save money. People who had been background characters in the story I thought was only about family now stepping forward into light. We sat around the dining table, the same one I had once set with chipped plates and handwritten name cards begging for recognition that never came. This time the plates didn't match either, but no one noticed. Glasses clinked. Bread was torn with hands, not knives, and the table filled with the kind of laughter that didn't need staging. It started small, cautious, then rolled bigger, spilling into the hallway, up the staircase, filling corners that had gone hollow. For the first time since I had bought the Solstice house, the laughter belonged to me. I looked around the room at Jonas, leaning back with his wine, telling a story that made even Clara smirk at Clara herself, allowing the briefest chuckle to escape before shaking her head at the others, wiping tears from their eyes as the laughter kept cresting. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't blood. But it was true. The house seemed to breathe with us. The lavender scent had faded to nothing, replaced by something warmer, the smell of roasted chicken cooling in foil of wax, melting down the sides of simple candles of the faint smoke from the fireplace I had finally coaxed back to life. For months, the Solstice house had been a battleground. Now it felt like a hearth. I realized then that chosen family doesn't arrive with fanfare. It gathers slowly, quietly, in the form of people who stay when no one is watching, people who don't rewrite your name to make themselves bigger, people who laugh with you rather than at you. Blood can betray, but truth finds its way into new bonds, weaving something stronger than inheritance. At one point, I slipped away from the table, standing in the doorway just to watch. The sight of them, heads bent together, voices overlapping, laughter spilling without fear, was something I wanted to memorize. For so long, I had thought of this house as evidence, as exhibit after exhibit in a case against those who tried to erase me. But in that moment, I saw it differently. It wasn't just a record of what had been stolen. It was a stage for what could grow. The walls once haunted with their curated images now reflected something else, belonging that didn't need to be proven, only lived. My house. My name. My laughter. When I returned to the table, Jonas caught my eye. He didn't say anything, just raised his glass. Clara followed then the others. I lifted mine too, the reflection of the candlelight flickering across the rim. The toast wasn't rehearsed. It didn't need words. It was enough to know that in this house, at this table, I wasn't erased. I was chosen. The camera lens stared back at me like an unblinking witness. For a moment, I just sat there in the quiet of the Solstice house, listening to the hum of the old radiator, the soft tick of the clock on the wall. The laughter from earlier, Jonas, Clara, the others, had already faded into memory, leaving behind only the echo of warmth in rooms that had once been cold. I folded my hands on the table, leaned slightly forward, and let the weight of it all settle. My family, I began, my voice low but steady, taught me about borders. Not the kind that divide nations drawn on maps with ink and ambition. The borders I learned about are quieter, invisible, and they exist right in front of your own door. I let the silence hang long enough for the words to sink, because it was true. Blood had been the first line, the first border I was told could never be crossed. Family was supposed to be infinite, unconditional, unbreakable. Yet in this house, with these walls as witnesses, I had learned that the harshest borders aren't made of fences or walls. They're made of choices, of who is allowed in and who is pushed out. of locks changed without warning, of laughter staged to cover absence. I thought belonging was permanent, I said, glancing around at the walls that had once betrayed me. That if you share blood, you share trust. But I was wrong. Belonging isn't given. It's taken. It's defended. It's built. And sometimes the people you trust most are the first to test the strength of your borders. I reached for the folder beside me, thick now. With every exhibit, I had gathered the photo of the boxes stamped with Rowan's initials. The voicemail where Maribel whispered instructions to erase me. The grainy CCTV of Helena's hands in my drawer. The strategy tape. The judgment stamped with my name. I pressed my hand flat against it. Evidence kept me alive when love tried to bury me. Every border they drew, I answered with proof. Every attempt to erase me, I met with record. That's how I survived. My voice caught slightly, but I didn't stop. I leaned closer to the camera, my eyes sharp, my words deliberate. So here's what I know now. You can't stop someone from drawing borders, but you can choose where you stand, on their side or on your own. And the hardest decision you'll ever make is not whether to fight them, it's whether to forgive them once the fight is done. The room was so still I could hear the faint rustle of the flame from the candle burning beside me. I thought of Helena lowering her eyes in Court Rowan's silence, swallowing his usual composure, Maribel's hands twitching near her phone. I thought of how long I had waited for their recognition, their approval, their love. And I thought of how different the laughter had sounded tonight, raw, imperfect, real, when it came from people who chose me without obligation. I let out a breath I hadn't realized I'd been holding. My voice softened, but the words stayed sharp. Family taught me about borders, and what I've learned is this. The most important border you'll ever defend isn't your front yard or your passport. It's yourself. It's your name. It's your truth. And when the people you love most cross that line when they try to erase you, you only have two choices. I let my gaze lock onto the lens, holding steady. Keep the peace. A pause. Or keep yourself. The silence stretched heavy and electric. Then I let the faintest trace of a smile curve my mouth, not out of joy, but out of defiance. You already know which one I chose. The camera light blinked once red against the shadows, capturing me in the glow of my own words. For the first time, I didn't feel like I was pleading my case. I felt like I was closing the record. If it were you, would you choose to keep the peace, press 1? Or keep yourself, press 0 below in the comments. And with that, I reached forward and shut the camera off, leaving the Solstice house quiet again. Quiet, but finally mine.